November 3rd, 2019. The first thing she heard was the crash. Not a car, not thunder, just a single ceramic mug hitting the floor of the Hollow Spoon Diner at 11:47 p.m. And somehow, in the dead quiet of a Tuesday night in Grayfield, Oregon, it sounded like the world splitting open. Lena Vasquez spun around from the counter, dish towel still in her hand, and saw him. He was slumped in the corner booth, the one nobody sat in because the vinyl was cracked and the window draft could cut through a wool coat like a razor. He hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. She was certain of it. She'd wiped that table herself. Yet there he was, soaking wet from the November rain, one hand pressed flat against the table like he was trying to stop the room from spinning, and his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were the strangest color she had ever seen on a living person. Not gray, not green, something between the two that had no name she knew. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice came out wrong, too thin, like it had been wrung dry. "I'll pay for the mug." Lena looked at the shattered pieces on the floor, looked at him, looked at the rain still dripping from his jaw onto the cracked vinyl seat. He had no bag, no umbrella, no coat, just a dark shirt plastered to his skin like a second layer of cold. His hands, she noticed, were shaking. Something in her chest made a decision before her brain caught up. "You'll pay for it after you eat something," she said, and turned toward the kitchen before he could argue. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that in 36 hours, that name would be on every financial news channel on the planet. She didn't know that the man shaking in her corner booth was worth more than this entire town would earn in 2 lifetimes. She didn't know any of it. But she was about to. 2 days earlier. Chapter 1. The thing about Grayfield was that it had the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that came after something had already left. The mill had closed 7 years ago. The highway bypass had redirected tourist traffic 4 years after that. Now the town existed in a kind of suspended state, like a photograph of itself from 1994, faded at the edges, nobody quite willing to admit it was over. Lena had grown up here. She had also tried, twice, to leave. The first time was for college, a graphic design scholarship at Portland State that she'd deferred for 1 semester to help her mother through a surgery, and then deferred again, and then watched expire. The second time was for a man named Derek, who had promised her Austin, Texas, and delivered 8 months of emotional manipulation and a maxed-out credit card before she'd packed 1 bag and driven back up the coast with the radio off. She was 28 now. She worked the closing shift at the Hollow Spoon 6 nights a week, and on Sunday mornings she designed wedding invitations and birthday cards on a freelance platform for amounts of money that felt insulting but added up, barely, to something survivable. Her apartment was above the hardware store on Clement Street. It had a radiator that clicked like it was typing Morse code at 3 a.m., and a window that faced the exact angle of the morning sun that made it impossible to sleep past 6. She had a cat named Birch who knocked things off shelves deliberately and with apparent satisfaction. It was not the life she had planned. It was, however, hers. She was in the middle of closing out the register, counting quarters with the particular dead-eyed focus of someone who had done it 10,000 times, when the bell above the door announced a customer at 11:44 p.m., 3 minutes before she would have flipped the lock. She didn't look up immediately. "We're about to close," she said, by reflex. No answer. She looked up. He was standing just inside the door, and for a half-second she thought he might be sick. The way he was holding himself, one hand on the doorframe, shoulders drawn in, jaw set hard like he was refusing to let his body show whatever it was trying to show, reminded her of the way her mother had stood in the kitchen doorway the morning of her diagnosis. That very specific posture of a person overriding their own collapse. He was tall. That was the first thing she actually registered once the concern cleared. Tall, with dark hair that rain had plastered to his forehead, wearing clothes that were clearly expensive, even soaked through. She could tell by the cut of the shirt, the particular way the fabric hung even wet. But no jacket, no bag, nothing in his hands. He made it to the corner booth and sat down heavily, and that was when his elbow caught the mug she'd left at the table's edge to collect later, and it went over and shattered on the floor, and he said, "I'll pay for the mug," in that wrung-out voice. and Lena made a decision that was, objectively, not her smartest. She went to the kitchen and she made him food. Not just coffee, not a slice of whatever pie was left. She put on the grill, found the last of the burger patties that were supposed to go in tomorrow's prep, pulled out the good sourdough they baked in-house on Tuesdays, built him something real, and carried it out with a glass of water and a coffee she hadn't asked if he wanted. She set it down in front of him without ceremony. He stared at the plate, then at her. Something moved across his face. Surprise, she thought, but deeper than the ordinary kind, like surprise that had traveled a long distance to get there. "I didn't order anything," he said. "I know. I don't have—" He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "I should tell you, I don't currently have a way to pay for this." Lena pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, because her feet hurt and she was tired, and something about this man made her want to understand the sentence he'd just spoken. Don't currently. Not can't. Not I'm broke. The word currently was doing a lot of work. "What happened to you?" she asked. Direct. She'd never had much patience for circling. He looked at her for a moment, like he was deciding something. "My wallet is in a town car that is currently parked outside a hotel in Portland," he said. "My phone died somewhere between the highway and here. I got out of the car to get air, and the driver, I didn't tell him I was getting out. He didn't see me, he left. A beat. I walked about 4 miles before the rain started." Lena blinked. "You walked 4 miles in November with no coat?" "Yes. In the rain." "Also yes. Why didn't you ask someone to borrow their phone?" Something flickered in his expression. Not embarrassment. Exactly. Closer to the look of a person who had just realized, in real time, that the answer to that question revealed something about them they hadn't intended to reveal. "I didn't want to explain who I was," he said, carefully. Lena looked at him. He looked back. "Eat," she said, and stood up. She went back behind the counter and finished counting the register, and she could feel him watching her with that same expression, that complicated, traveling surprise, between bites. He ate the way people eat when they haven't eaten in longer than they've admitted to themselves, steadily, and without looking away from the plate. And when he finished, he set the fork down with the careful deliberateness of someone reassembling their composure. "Thank you," he said. "It's fine." She came back over, collected the plate. "There's a motel 2 blocks east. The Cedarwood. Tell Helen at the front desk that Lena sent you and she'll let you check in without a card, and you can sort the payment tomorrow. She's done it before for people passing through." He was quiet for a moment. "You do this often? Feed strangers and arrange their accommodations?" "You're not the first person to walk in here in a rough night," she said. "You won't be the last. Most people would be suspicious." "I'm plenty suspicious," she said. "I'm just not cruel about it." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face, but she saw the place it had tried to reach. "I'm Lena," she said, because the silence had stretched to the length where names were appropriate. He paused, and she noticed the pause, catalogued it without knowing why, and then he said, "Rhett." Just Rhett. No last name. She didn't ask for one. In her experience, people in corner booths at midnight who offered only first names had their reasons, and those reasons were none of her business unless they made themselves so. "All right, Rhett," she said. "I'll walk you to the Cedarwood. I'm heading that direction anyway." She wasn't, particularly, but the 4-mile walk in the rain detail had not left her mind, and she had the sense that this man would navigate badly out of pride before he'd ask for directions. She was already learning him. She didn't realize that yet. She untied her apron, pulled on her coat, hit the lights in the back, and locked the kitchen door with the efficiency of someone who had done it so many times, the sequence lived in her hands rather than her head. He was standing by the door when she came back out. He held it open for her. Automatic, the kind of courtesy that lives in the body before the brain registers the situation, and she stepped out into the cold Grayfield night with a man she had known for 11 minutes. The rain had eased to a mist. The streetlights on Clement Street turned everything amber and soft. They walked in silence for half a block, which Lena found comfortable. Silence was information. Silence told you whether someone was at ease, whether they were preoccupied, whether they were performing something. His silence was the silence of a person whose brain was going at a speed that his face wasn't. Thinking hard about something, under a very controlled surface. "The mug," he said, eventually. "Forget it." "I don't want to forget it. What did it cost?" "It cost $4. I want to pay you back." "Rhett." She looked at him sideways. "It was a diner mug. We have 40 of them." "It's the principle," he said, and there was something in his voice when he said it. A firmness that sat oddly against the soaking wet, no-coat, 4-mile walk situation. Like the principle of paying for things was deeply, personally important to him in a way that had nothing to do with $4. She filed that away. The Cedarwood Motel appeared at the end of the block, single story, painted a faded blue, with a neon sign that buzzed faintly in the mist. Helen Puckett was at the front desk, as she always was until midnight, reading a paperback with a foil cover. She looked up over her reading glasses when Lena came through the door. "Little late, hun." "Helen, this is Rhett. He's had a night. Can you do the card thing and he'll sort it in the morning?" Helen looked at Rhett, looked at Lena, made the calculation that Lena had known she would make. She trusted Lena's judgment the way small towns trusted their reliable people. "Room 7, Helen said, and took a key off the board behind her. "Checkout's 11, and there's coffee in the lobby at 6. Rhett took the key. He looked at Lena, and again there was that almost smile, and this time it almost made it. "Thank you," he said. "For all of it." "Get some sleep," she said. She walked home in the mist, Clement Street quiet as a held breath around her, birch winding around her ankles when she got through the door. She thought about the way he'd said currently. She thought about the pause before he'd given his name. She made herself a cup of tea and didn't think about it anymore. She was very good at not thinking about things. She would be significantly less good at it by morning. Because at 6:14 a.m., Lena's phone lit up with a text from Helen Puckett that said only, "Lena, who did you send to my motel? Turn on the news right now." Chapter 2. The television in Lena's apartment was a 32-inch flat screen she'd bought secondhand from a garage sale 3 years ago, and it had a remote with a sticky volume button that required a very specific kind of firm but gentle press that she had mastered through repetition and mild frustration. She pressed it now with hands that weren't entirely steady. The channel loaded, and there he was. Not in a corner booth, not soaking wet, not holding a door open with the automatic courtesy of someone whose body remembered manners even when the rest of him was unraveling. He was in a photograph on the bottom left corner of a CNBC breaking news chyron, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been constructed rather than sewn, standing on the steps of what appeared to be a government building in New York. His hair was dry. His expression was composed to the precise degree that telegraphed power, not arrogant, not warm, just utterly, completely in command of every cubic inch of space around him. The chyron beneath the photo read, "Rhett Calloway, C.O. Calloway Global, missing since Tuesday evening. Family confirms whereabouts unknown." And in smaller text beneath that, "Net worth estimated at $2.1 billion. Lena sat down on her couch. She sat down not because she chose to, but because her legs made the decision without consulting her. Birch jumped up beside her and headbutted her elbow, which she did not register. On screen, a financial anchor was speaking with the clipped urgency of someone delivering news they were personally thrilled about. Calloway Global shares dropped 4% at pre-market open, following confirmation that Rhett Calloway has not been in contact with his executive team or personal security detail since approximately 8 p.m. Tuesday, sources close to the family say. Lena turned the television off. She sat in the silence of her apartment for 11 seconds. She counted them, later, because her brain did strange things under shock, and then she picked up her phone and called Helen back. Helen answered on the first ring. "You saw it," Helen said. "I saw it." "Lena." Helen's voice was doing something between a whisper and a shout, the specific frequency of small-town astonishment. "He's a billionaire. I know what the chyron said, Helen. He's in room 7, drinking the lobby coffee right now, like a regular person." "Helen." Lena pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. "Don't call anyone. Don't tell anyone. Do you understand me?" A pause. "Why not?" "Because he was walking in the rain for 4 miles because he didn't want to explain who he was," she said. "Just give me 20 minutes. She hung up before Helen could process that fully, pulled on yesterday's jeans and a sweater, shoved her feet into boots, and walked out into the 6 a.m. gray of Grayfield, Oregon. The Cedarwood lobby was empty except for Helen, who was stationed behind the desk with the posture of someone pretending to read but actually watching the hallway like a hawk, and a coffee station with a slightly depleted carafe. Room 7's door was closed. Lena knocked. Silence. Then the particular quality of silence that meant someone was on the other side of the door making a decision. "It's Lena," she said. From the diner. The door opened. He was dressed, same clothes as the night before, which made sense, but his hair was dry now and he'd clearly slept, because the particular thinness had left his voice when he spoke. "You saw the news," he said. It wasn't a question. "Helen texted me at 6 in the morning, with instructions to turn on the television," Lena said. "So yes." He leaned against the doorframe. In the gray morning light, without the rain and the crisis, she could see him more clearly. The angles of his face, the way he carried himself, with a kind of structural stillness that she now understood differently than she had at midnight. This was not a man who was naturally quiet. This was a man who had spent years building a controlled surface, and last night the structure beneath it had cracked just enough that he'd ended up in Grayfield. "Are you going to call someone?" he asked. "That depends," she said. "Are you in danger?" "No." "Are you running from something illegal?" Something moved across his face that was almost amusement. "No." "Then I'm not calling anyone," she said, "but I think you should." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door, which she understood as an invitation, and she came inside. Room 7 was exactly what you'd expect of the Cedarwood. A double bed with a blue quilted cover, a wood veneered dresser, a window that looked out onto the motel parking lot. It smelled like clean linen and the faint ghost of somebody's pine air freshener. He sat on the edge of the bed. She took the chair by the window, because the chair by the window was the appropriate choice for a woman who was not going to pretend this was a normal situation. "How did you know my name?" she asked. "Last night you said Rhett, but the news says Rhett Calloway." "It is my name," he said. "I just didn't say the second part." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I needed one night where no one looked at me the way you're looking at me right now." Lena held his gaze. She thought about being offended. She decided not to be, because she understood it, actually. Understood it more than she wanted to admit. "How long have you been out of contact?" she asked. "Since 8 p.m. Tuesday. It's 6:30 Wednesday morning. That's about 10 hours. "Long enough," he said, in a tone that told her 10 hours was, in some way she didn't yet understand, meaningful. "Your family thinks you're missing." "My family," he said, carefully, "and my board of directors are two groups of people who have very different reasons for wanting to know where I am." Lena filed that away beside currently, and the pause before his name. "There's a phone at the front desk," she said. "Helen will let you use it." "I know. You're going to have to make the call eventually." "I know that too." She looked at him. He looked back at her the way he'd looked at her last night, with that traveling, complicated surprise, like she kept doing things that landed in an unexpected place. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "Last night. The food, the motel, walking me over here." He paused. "Why?" Lena thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because you looked like someone who was used to handling everything themselves and had hit the one night where they couldn't," she said. "And that particular situation seems to me like the one time you shouldn't have to." Rhett Calloway, CEO of Callaway Global, worth $2.1 billion according to CNBC, said nothing for a long moment. Then, the mug was $4. "I told you to forget the mug. I don't forget things I owe." He said it the same way he'd said it last night, that particular firmness, the principle beneath the amount. "When I have my wallet back, I'm going to pay you for the mug." It was a diner mug. "It was yours," he said, "and I broke it." Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, buttoned her coat, and said, "There's breakfast at the diner at 7. Come when you're ready, and use Helen's phone first." She left before he could say anything else, because something about the way he'd said "it was yours" was sitting in her chest, in a way she needed the cold air outside to address. He used Helen's phone. He called Daniel Yu, his head of security, not his assistant, not his board liaison, not his sister, because Daniel was the only person in his professional life who would absorb the information. I'm in Grayfield, Oregon. I walked 4 miles in the rain without adding a judgment to it. He was right. Daniel said, "Are you safe?" Rhett said, "Yes." Daniel said, "Good. The board is losing their minds. The board can wait until 9 a.m. A pause. Your sister is the one who called the press." Rhett closed his eyes briefly. Of course she was. "Tell her I'm fine. Tell no one where I am. Bring me a car, my wallet, and a phone charger. No press, no security detail. Just you." Rhett. "Just you, Daniel." Another pause. Longer. 4 hours. 4 hours is fine. He hung up Helen's phone and stood in the cedarwood lobby for a moment, looking at the water stain on the ceiling tile and thinking about a woman who had fed him without asking anything, walked him 2 blocks in the mist, and told him to forget a $4 mug. He had not forgotten a single thing in his professional life in 15 years. He was not going to forget the mug. He was also, and this was newer, stranger territory, not sure he wanted to forget Grayfield. He walked 2 blocks east to the Hollow Spoon Diner and pushed the door open at 7:04 a.m., and Lena looked up from the coffee station with an expression that was trying to be neutral and mostly succeeding. There were 3 other customers, an older man with a newspaper, 2 women in scrubs who were clearly coming off a night shift somewhere. Nobody looked at Rhett. Nobody recognized him. In Grayfield, at 7 a.m., he was just a man who'd had a rough night. He sat down at the counter, which felt appropriate. Lena poured him coffee without asking, because she had already learned something about him too. "Helen didn't tell anyone?" he asked. "I told Helen not to." "And Helen listens to you?" "Helen has known me since I was 7, Lena said. "So yes." He wrapped his hands around the mug, a different one from last night, he noted, identical to all the others, and felt the warmth travel up through his palms. "I called my security chief," he said. "He's coming with a car in 4 hours." Lena nodded. She was pulling out a notepad, the old-fashioned paper kind, which somehow he hadn't expected. "Eggs? Please. How?" "However is easiest." She looked at him over her shoulder. "That's not an answer." "Scrambled," he said, which made her turn back to the kitchen, and he thought he might have seen the beginning of a smile. He sat at the counter of the Hollow Spoon Diner and drank coffee while the morning built itself around him, the older man turning newspaper pages, the 2 nurses talking in low, tired voices about something that had happened on their shift, the particular clatter and smell of a diner kitchen doing its first work of the day. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sat somewhere without his phone. He couldn't remember the last time a room had no idea who he was. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him how he wanted his eggs, as though the answer genuinely mattered to them, and was also, absolutely, non-negotiable. Lena set the plate in front of him. Scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, sliced tomato. "Thank you," he said. "Stop thanking me," she said. "It's just breakfast." But it wasn't just breakfast, and something in her voice told him she knew that too, and was choosing not to say it, which was its own kind of gift. Outside the window, Grayfield's morning went on, gray and quiet and entirely unimpressed. Inside, Rhett Calloway ate scrambled eggs at a diner counter and thought about 4 hours and what happened after them, and whether the woman currently refilling the nurse's coffee had any idea what she'd set in motion last night by deciding not to be cruel about her suspicion. His phone, Helen's phone, rerouted through Daniel's emergency relay, buzzed once on the counter with a message preview he didn't open. The board could wait. He ate his toast. Chapter 3. The 4 hours passed the way busy mornings always did at the Hollow Spoon, in a blur of coffee refills and ticket orders, and the particular controlled chaos of a diner that was understaffed by one person because Greta had called in sick again, and Lena was covering tables, and the counter simultaneously, with the focused energy of someone who had learned to operate on autopilot, while their brain ran a separate program underneath. The separate program was, unfortunately, entirely about the man at the counter. He didn't leave. That was the first thing. She'd half expected him to take his eggs and retreat back to room 7 to wait out his 4 hours in private, which would have been the logical move for a man who'd spent 10 hours hiding from the world. Instead, he stayed at the counter, moved once to a corner booth when the morning rush hit and the counter filled up, and sat there with Helen's borrowed paperback. He'd asked Helen for something to read, and Helen, flustered and honored, had given him the foil-covered romance novel she'd been reading the night before, which Rhett Calloway accepted without a flicker of irony and read with apparent genuine attention. Lena noticed this between tables. She noticed other things too, against her will. The way he'd moved to the booth specifically so she'd have the counter space for customers. She hadn't asked him to. He'd just seen the dynamic and adjusted without making it a thing. The way he said thank you to her every single time she refilled his coffee. Not performatively, just consistently. Like gratitude was a habit rather than a gesture. The way the two nurses had eventually noticed him, not because they'd recognized him, but because he was, objectively, the kind of person a room eventually notices. And he'd given them a polite nod and returned immediately to his foil-covered book, which had apparently cut off whatever interest they might have pursued. At 9:15, he looked up from the book and caught her looking at him. She turned back to the coffee station with the smooth redirect of someone who had not been caught doing anything. "You have a tell," he said, from the booth. She looked back. "I'm sorry?" "When you're thinking about something you don't want to think about," he said, "you reorganize whatever's in front of you. You've moved those mugs 3 times. Lena looked down. The mugs were in fact in a slightly different configuration than they'd been 20 minutes ago. "I'm tidying," she said. "You're thinking," he said, "and tidying is what your hands do while you do it." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back with that steady, contained expression that she was beginning to understand was not coldness. It was the face of a person who processed everything and revealed only the parts they chose to. "You've known me for 8 hours," she said. "I'm observant," he said, without apology. "So am I," she said. "And you've read the same page of that book 4 times. Something flickered in his expression, a crack in the control, small and quick. He looked down at the book, then back up at her. "Fair," he said. She came over with the coffee carafe, refilled his mug, his 4th, she noted, which meant either he had an extraordinary caffeine tolerance or he was using the coffee as something to hold, and stood at the edge of the booth. "What happens when your car comes?" she asked. "I go back to Portland, then New York." "And the board meeting you clearly missed?" His jaw moved. "Gets rescheduled, at significant cost to several people's patients." "Is that why you got out of the car?" she asked. "The board meeting?" The pause this time was longer than the one before his name the night before. "There was a vote," he said. "Yesterday evening. I knew the outcome before I walked into the room." He looked at his coffee mug. "I just didn't know, until I was sitting in the car afterward, how much the outcome was going to cost me." Lena slid into the seat across from him, because the morning rush had died, and her feet had remembered they existed, and because she genuinely wanted to understand the sentence he'd just built. "What was the vote about?" she asked. "A merger," he said, "one I've been opposing for 2 years. And it passed. Unanimously. Including the 3 board members I appointed myself." He said it with a flatness that she understood was doing a great deal of work. Flatness, in her experience, was what people used when the real feeling was too large for regular expression. "That feels like a betrayal," she said. He looked at her sharply, like the word had landed somewhere specific. "It's business," he said. "It can be both," she said. He was quiet. Outside, the November morning had cleared slightly. The mist was gone, and a pale, watery sun was making a half-hearted attempt at the sky over Clement Street. "The merger means Callaway Global absorbs a company called Veritech Solutions," he said, slowly, like he was deciding how much to give her as he spoke. "Veritech has a subsidiary in Singapore that has been under labor investigation for 3 years. The investigation has not concluded. My board voted to proceed anyway." Lena was quiet, processing. "That's not just a business problem," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't. So you got out of the car." "So I got out of the car." She looked at him. He was looking at Clement Street through the window, and in the pale morning light, the control in his face had loosened by another fraction, and she could see something underneath it that she recognized, the particular exhaustion of a person who had been fighting something for a long time, and had just watched the ground shift beneath them. For what it's worth, she said. Getting out of the car was probably the right call. He looked back at her. It solved nothing. No, she agreed. But it kept you from making decisions in the worst version of yourself. That's worth something. He studied her for a moment with that observant, unhurried attention. You do that, he said. Do what? Say the thing that's true instead of the thing that's comfortable. He said it like he was noting the existence of something rare. Most people in my life, most people who know who I am, say the comfortable thing. I didn't know who you were until 6 this morning, she said. By then I'd already formed opinions. The almost smile came back. This time it made it. Just barely, just at the corner of his mouth, but fully enough to count. Lena stood up, because the smile had done something to the air in the booth that she needed to be standing for. Daniel arrived at 10:47 a.m. Rhett saw the black SUV pull onto Clement Street from the booth window, and something in his chest performed a complicated maneuver, relief and reluctance arriving simultaneously in a proportion he hadn't anticipated. He set down the foil-covered book. He'd actually read most of it. It was, objectively, quite good. Daniel Yu, 41, former military, the only person in Rhett's professional orbit who treated him like a person rather than an asset, came through the diner door in a dark coat and immediately located Rhett with the professional efficiency of a man whose entire skill set was built on finding people. He looked at Rhett. He looked at the diner. He looked at Lena behind the counter. He kept his expression entirely neutral, which Rhett recognized as Daniel working very hard. Sir, Daniel said. Sit down, Daniel. You want coffee? I want to get you back to Portland. Sit down, Rhett said, and Daniel sat, because 15 years had taught him which tone meant negotiable and which didn't. Lena appeared with a mug and the carafe without being asked, which made Daniel blink. Thank you, Rhett said, to Lena, without looking up, his fourth thank you of the morning. He was aware of the count. Lena went back to the counter. Daniel watched her go, and then looked at Rhett with an expression that was asking a question he hadn't spoken yet. She found me last night, Rhett said quietly. Fed me, got me a room, didn't call anyone. Daniel's expression did not change, but his eyes did, the particular sharpening of a security professional assessing a variable. She knew who you were? Daniel asked. Not until this morning. And she still didn't call anyone. No. Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug, mirroring Rhett's own posture from this morning, which Rhett noticed, and looked at Clement Street through the window. The board is expecting a statement by noon, he said. The board will get a statement when I've decided what to say. Your sister called the press. I know. Rhett kept his voice level. I'll deal with Camille when we're back in Portland. What's the current media position? Voluntary absence, not missing. Your PR team pivoted at 8 a.m. when the CNBC piece ran. Daniel pulled a phone from his coat. Rhett's phone, charged, screen lit with a volume of notifications that was almost architectural in scale, and set it on the table between them. 47 missed calls, 30 from your assistant, 9 from board members, 4 from your sister, 2 from numbers I don't recognize, and 1 from your attorney. Rhett looked at the phone. He did not pick it up. The 2 I don't recognize, he said. Trace them. Already did. One is a journalist at the Financial Times. The other, Daniel paused, in the way that meant the other was the part of the sentence that mattered, is Oliver Vance. The name landed in Rhett's chest like a stone in still water. Oliver Vance, CEO of Veritech Solutions. The man at the center of the merger, Rhett had spent 2 years fighting. The man who had apparently, at some point in the last 12 hours, gotten hold of Rhett's personal cell number. The implications of that cascaded quickly, and none of them were good. When did he call? Rhett asked. 6:43 a.m. 40 minutes after Rhett had called Daniel, which meant someone had told Vance he was reachable, or at least that he'd resurfaced, within that window. Who knew I'd called you? Rhett asked. You, me, and Helen Puckett at the Cedarwood Motel, whose phone you used. Rhett looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Rhett. Helen didn't call anyone, said Lena from behind the counter, and they both turned. She was restocking the pastry case, apparently without looking at them, but she'd clearly heard enough. She called me, Lena said. I told her not to call anyone else. Helen is 71 years old, and has lived in this town her whole life. She doesn't know Oliver Vance from a weather vane. Rhett looked at her. You know the name Oliver Vance. I looked up Callaway Global when I got home this morning, she said. The merger was the third result. He held her gaze for a moment. Then someone in my own camp made the call, he said, not to Lena, but to Daniel. Lena went back to the pastry case. Rhett picked up his phone for the first time since Tuesday, not to answer anything, but to look at the call log, at the timestamps, at the 47 missed pieces of a world that had kept turning without him for 10 hours. He put it face down on the table. I need 24 more hours, he said. Daniel's expression did this specific thing, a micro-movement at the corner of his eye, that meant, that is not a request I can support, but was modulated by the 15-year understanding that arguing with Rhett on certain things was a resource expenditure that yielded nothing. 24 hours, Daniel said. I stay. You can stay at the Cedarwood. Helen will sort it. I'm not staying at... Daniel stopped, looked at the hollow spoon around him, looked at Lena. Rhett picked up Helen's foil-covered romance novel and placed it on the counter in front of Lena. I finished it, he said. It was good. The ending was better than I expected. Lena looked at the book, looked at him. Most things are, she said. He held her gaze for one beat longer than was strictly neutral, and then walked to the door and pushed it open into the pale November sun. Behind him, he heard Daniel say, very quietly, to no one in particular, what is happening? And Lena, equally quietly, I genuinely don't know. Chapter 4. She told herself the 24 hours meant nothing to her personally. She was moderately convincing. The rest of the Wednesday morning shift passed in the ordinary way. The lunch prep, the supplier delivery that was short 2 cases of eggs again, and required a phone call that Lena had memorized by now. The quarterly health inspection paperwork that her boss Ray had been asking her to file for 3 weeks, and that she finally sat down to complete during the 2 p.m. lull, because if she didn't do it, Ray wouldn't, and then they'd both suffer the consequences. Ray Dominguez owned the hollow spoon the way some people owned boats, enthusiastically in concept, minimally in practice. He was 63, had bought the diner from its original owners in 2004, and had subsequently discovered that what he actually loved was the idea of a diner, rather than the operational reality of one. Lena had become, over 4 years, the person who held the actual thing together, while Ray developed an unexpectedly successful sideline in woodworking. He came in at 2:30, smelling like sawdust, and found Lena at the back table with the inspection paperwork. You're a saint, he said. I'm an employee who doesn't want to fail a health inspection, she said. Same thing. He poured himself coffee and looked around the empty diner. Quiet today. It was busy this morning. I heard we had an interesting customer. Lena looked up. Ray had the expression of a man who had received information and was now presenting it in a way designed to extract more information. This was a Ray specialty. Helen called you. Helen called her daughter, who called me, Ray said. Something about a billionaire in room 7, and you telling everyone to keep quiet about it. I told Helen to keep quiet about it. Helen told her daughter. Helen told her daughter, Lena repeated, with the flat resignation of someone recalibrating their expectation of small-town information containment. Is he still in town? Ray asked, with a casualness that was performing a great deal. That's not my information to share, Ray. Ray looked at her over his coffee mug. Lena, honey, if a billionaire has taken a liking to the hollow spoon, that is relevant to my business interests. He had eggs and toast and 4 coffees, she said. He's not a business opportunity. He's a person who had a rough night. Ray was quiet for a moment. You're protective of him. I'm not protective of him, she said, and returned to the inspection paperwork with the focused energy of someone who had decided the conversation was over. Ray let it be over, but he took his coffee to the window and looked at Clement Street for a moment, before he went into the back office, which told her he was more curious than he was letting on. She filed the paperwork. She did not think about the 24 hours. At 4 p.m. she finished her shift, handed off to the evening staff, just Tommy, 17, who could manage a quiet Wednesday night, and walked home in the early dark of November, because the days were short now, and sunset came before 5. Her apartment was warm. Birch was asleep on the radiator, which clicked its Morse code around him. She made tea and opened her freelance platform, and found 3 new commission requests, 2 birthday invitations and a thank you card design, and began working through them with the half attention of someone whose primary focus was elsewhere. The primary focus elsewhere was a man who had stayed an extra 24 hours. She was not naive. She knew what the 24 hours was and wasn't. It was not, for instance, about her. Rhett Calloway had a merger crisis, and a board betrayal, and an antagonist named Oliver Vance, who had somehow gotten his personal phone number, and Grayfield was a place to think before going back to face all of that. She was the person who had been kind to him, which he was unused to in a specific way that had clearly landed, and that was the full extent of the explanation. She was very firm about this while she designed a birthday invitation with balloon illustrations for a 7-year-old named Priya. Her phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She almost never answered unknown numbers, but something made her thumb move. Lena Vasquez. The voice was male, smooth, with a professional pleasantness that had the texture of something rehearsed. "Who's asking?" she said. "My name is Oliver Vance." A pause, weighted and deliberate. "I'm trying to locate a mutual acquaintance. I understand you may have had contact with Rhett Calloway in the last 24 hours. Lena's hand tightened on the phone. She said nothing for 3 seconds, which was long enough to be meaningful. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Her voice came out even. She was surprised by how even it came out. "Of course," Vance said, pleasantly. "If you do happen to have any information about Mr. Calloway's whereabouts, I'd consider it a significant personal favor if you'd be in touch. I can be very generous with my appreciation." Another pause. "The Hollow Spoon Diner, is it? Charming little place. I imagine it could use a good word in the right circles." The threat was so well dressed it almost passed as an offer. Almost. "I don't know how you got this number," Lena said. "Don't call it again." She hung up. She sat very still on her couch for approximately 30 seconds. Then she put on her coat and walked to the Cedarwood Motel. He was in the parking lot when she arrived, which was not where he'd expected to spend his evening, standing in the cold outside room 7, on a call with his attorney that had been going for 40 minutes and showed no signs of resolution. But Daniel had taken the room, and Rhett found he preferred the cold to the 4 walls anyway. He saw Lena coming up the block, and something in his chest did the thing it had been doing periodically since last night, the thing he'd been declining to examine directly. He held up one finger. One moment, and she stopped, reading the gesture with the immediate comprehension of someone accustomed to calibrating other people's situations. "Nathan," he said into the phone. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes. "Yes, I'm aware of the timeline. 10 minutes. He hung up. Lena was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her yet. The others he'd catalogued, the pragmatic kindness, the dry directness, the careful neutrality she put on when something was landing in a way she didn't want to show. This one was different. This one was controlled anger. "Oliver Vance called me," she said. The cold air between them went a different kind of cold. "What?" The word came out with an edge he hadn't intended to expose. 6:47 p.m., my personal number. She held his gaze. "He asked about your whereabouts. He mentioned the diner by name. He implied that a good word in the right circles would be, I believe the phrasing was, his appreciation for my cooperation." Rhett looked at her. The edge in his chest sharpened to something he recognized as fury, which he immediately brought under the controlled surface, because fury uncontrolled was a liability. "He threatened your business," Rhett said. "He dressed it up nicely," she said, "but yes." "How did he get your number?" "That's what I came to ask you." He ran the chain backward with the speed of someone whose mind moved in systems. Vance had called his personal phone at 6:43 a.m. Someone in Rhett's circle had given Vance that number, or told him Rhett had resurfaced, and that someone had also, apparently, given Vance enough information about Grayfield to locate Lena specifically. Which meant the information leak was not casual. It was targeted. Someone knew where Rhett was, knew Lena's name, knew the diner, and had fed all of it to Vance within hours. The board vote had been unanimous. 3 members he had appointed himself. He looked at Lena, who was watching him work through it with the patient attention of someone who understood she was seeing a process and was giving it space. "I'm sorry," he said. "He should not have contacted you. That will not happen again." I'm not here for an apology, she said. I'm here because you should know. I know, he said, and I need you to understand that this, he stopped, recalibrated. You getting pulled into this is not something I'm willing to allow. She looked at him steadily. You don't get to decide what I get pulled into, she said. He already called, I'm already in it. The question is what we do with that. He studied her. We. She'd said we without apparently noticing, in the tone of someone for whom the pronoun was simply the accurate one. Daniel needs to know about the call, he said. I assumed. And I need to know, did Vance say anything that indicated he knew you'd had contact with me, or was he fishing? Lena thought back, with visible care. He said, I understand you may have had contact, she said. The May was doing work. I think he had partial information. Enough to call, not enough to be certain. So we haven't confirmed anything to him. We have confirmed nothing. Rhett nodded slowly. The chain reformed in his mind with the new data added. Partial information. Someone had told Vance the town, possibly the diner, possibly Lena's name, but not enough to confirm contact, which meant the leak in his circle was operating on incomplete intel too. Come inside, he said. I need Daniel to hear this directly from you. She followed him to the room Daniel had taken, room 5, 2 doors down, and Rhett knocked once. Daniel opened the door in 20 seconds, registered Lena's presence, and without a word, opened the door wider and stepped back. The three of them sat in the small room, Daniel on the desk chair, Rhett on the edge of the bed, Lena in the chair by the window that was apparently her instinctive position in any room, and Lena recounted the call with the precise, sequential clarity of someone who had a very good memory and had been organizing the information since she hung up. When she finished, Daniel was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. He has a source inside your circle, Daniel said to Rhett. Not peripheral. Someone with access to your emergency contact chain and your geographic position within hours of your resurfacing. I know. That narrows it to 6 people. I know. Rhett. Daniel's voice shifted to the register he used when the professional and personal were the same thing. This is not a board politics situation anymore. If Vance has a source that deep and he's already applying pressure to civilians in a town you've been in for 12 hours, this is... coordinated, Rhett said. Yes. Lena was quiet. She was looking at Rhett with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. Not afraid, he noted. Recalibrating. The same process he used when new information restructured a situation. The merger, she said. The labor investigation in Singapore. The board vote. She paused. This isn't just a business disagreement, is it? Rhett looked at her. No, he said. I don't think it is. The silence that followed had weight. Outside room 5, the Cedarwood parking lot was empty in the dark, and Clement Street was quiet, and Grayfield sat in its November stillness, with no idea that something had just shifted inside it. Lena looked at her hands briefly, then back up. All right, she said, in the tone of someone making a decision. Tell me everything. Chapter 5. He had told the story exactly twice before. Once to Daniel, 18 months ago, in the back of a car leaving a meeting that had gone wrong in a way Rhett hadn't been able to articulate cleanly until afterward. Once to his attorney Nathan, 6 months ago, in the careful, structured language required by legal context. Not the full story, just the parts that could be documented. He had never told it to someone sitting in a motel chair in a small Oregon town at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, with a cup of bad vending machine coffee going cold in her hand. He told it anyway. Callaway Global was built by my father, he started. Started as a regional logistics company in the 80s. By the time I took over in 2011, it had expanded into infrastructure, communications, and partial energy holdings. My father he was many things, but he was ethical in the specific way that old-school businessmen sometimes were. He believed the company's reputation was a structural asset, not a PR position, an actual load-bearing wall. Lena was listening in the way he'd noticed, of listening completely. No performance of attention, no nodding along, just genuinely absorbing. When he died, Rhett continued, I inherited the company and a board that he had appointed over 30 years. Good people mostly. People who understood what the company was supposed to be. He paused. Over the last 4 years, 3 of those board members retired or stepped down. I appointed replacements. I thought I was appointing people who shared the company's values. I was, apparently, wrong about at least 3 of them. The ones who voted for the merger, Lena said. Yes. He looked at the wall for a moment. Veritech Solutions approached us 14 months ago. Oliver Vance pitched it as a vertical integration opportunity. Veritech handles specialized data infrastructure, which complements our communications holdings. On paper it's a clean fit. The numbers work. But, Lena said. But 18 months ago I received an anonymous communication, he said. A document package, financial records, internal memos, an employment tribunal filing from Singapore that had been suppressed. Paid off, not resolved. Veritech's Singapore subsidiary had been systematically underpaying contract workers, falsifying safety compliance records, and when 3 workers filed a formal complaint, the complaint disappeared. He said the last 2 words with a flatness that communicated everything the flatness was trying to contain. The workers were relocated. The records were altered. The investigation that followed was, according to the documents I received, significantly influenced by payments to 2 officials in the relevant regulatory body. The room was quiet. That's not a labor dispute, Lena said. That's bribery and suppression. Yes, and you've had this for 18 months. I've had it, my attorney has had it, and for the last 14 months I have been attempting to get it in front of the right people through the right channels without... He stopped. Chose the next words carefully, without detonating it in a way that exposes the workers further or gives Vance time to bury the remaining evidence. Daniel, who had been quiet in the desk chair with his arms crossed, said, "The anonymous source who sent the documents has not been identified, which means we don't know if the source is an ally or a setup." A setup? Lena looked between them. "If the documents are fabricated," Rhett said, "and I go public with them, I've defamed Vance and Veritech on falsified evidence. Callaway Global faces litigation that would cost, conservatively, 3 years and a significant portion of our operating capital. And Vance walks away clean. So you've been sitting on real evidence you can't fully trust," Lena said. "I've been working to verify it through independent channels," he said. 14 months of working. And last Tuesday, while I was still working, my board voted to proceed with the merger anyway. A beat. Which means either they don't know about the evidence, or they do know and have decided it doesn't matter, or they're connected to Vance in a way that precedes the merger conversation, Lena said. Rhett looked at her. She held the look evenly. "That's the third option," she said. "You said you appointed 3 new board members. What if Vance was involved in recommending them? Not directly. Through someone, a shared network, a mutual relationship, a suggestion that looked organic." The room was quiet again, but differently. The quality of quiet that follows a thing being said that has restructured something. Daniel uncrossed his arms. Rhett looked at Lena with the full, undivided attention he usually reserved for situations requiring his absolute concentration. "That," he said, slowly, "is a line of inquiry I have not fully pursued." "Because you were looking at Veritech," she said. "You were looking forward at the merger. But if the board was compromised before the merger was even proposed, then the merger isn't the play," Rhett said. "It's the conclusion. The play started earlier." Daniel stood up. He went to the small desk, opened his laptop, and began typing with the focused energy of a man who had just been handed a direction. Lena looked at Rhett. "How long ago did the 3 board members join?" "Paulson, 2 years ago. Garrett, 18 months. Reeves, 14 months. The anonymous document package arrived 18 months ago," she said. "Yes. 1 month before Garrett joined your board." Rhett was very still. He had the sensation, rare enough to be disorienting, of having missed something, of having been so close to a puzzle that the shape of it had been invisible. "The documents arrived right before Garrett," he said. "Which means one of 2 things," Lena said. "Either the timing is coincidental, or someone sent you those documents knowing that Garrett was about to join your board, to warn you. Or," she paused, turning it over, "to distract you, to make you focus on Veritech's history while the real mechanism was being installed inside your own company." Daniel stopped typing. He turned around slowly. The three of them looked at each other in the vending machine coffee quiet of room 5 at the Cedarwood Motel. "I need to make some calls," Daniel said. "Not on any line connected to the company," Rhett said. "I know." Daniel was already pulling out a secondary phone, a personal device Rhett recognized as the one he used when he needed communication the company's infrastructure couldn't touch. Lena stood up. She picked up her cold coffee, looked at it, and set it back down with the expression of someone who had drunk worse and was making a pragmatic assessment. "I should go," she said. "You don't have to," Rhett said. The words came out before the controlled surface had weighed them, which was, he noted, with the part of his mind that observed everything, unusual. Lena looked at him. He looked back. The controlled surface caught up and he kept his expression neutral, but the words were already out and they were already true. "There's nothing more useful I can do tonight," she said, not rejecting the words, filing them, which was somehow more precise. "You've already done more than you should have needed to," he said. "The call from Vance. I want you to understand that I take that seriously. If he contacts you again..." "I'll tell you," she said, simply, without negotiation. "And if you feel at any point that being connected to this situation puts you at risk..." "Rhett." She said his name in the tone she'd used for It's Just Breakfast, the tone that meant, stop building a structure around something that doesn't require one. "I'm a waitress in a town with one diner. My risk profile is limited. Vance has resources that could make life very difficult for a small business," he said. The implication he made about the diner was a bluff from a man fishing for information, she said. "He doesn't know what I know, which is everything, now, which means I'm more useful as someone who appears to know nothing," she said it matter-of-factly, like she'd already thought 3 steps ahead while he was still on 2. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're very good at this," he said. "At what?" "Thinking under pressure." She put on her coat. "I grew up in a town with no resources and a mother who got sick," she said. "You learn to be efficient with what you have." She said it without bitterness, just information, the way she offered most things. He stood, because she was leaving and it seemed right, and they were suddenly standing at a closer proximity than the room's geography had required, and the specific quality of the air between them did the thing it had been doing periodically since the booth that morning, compressing, slightly, in a way that was not about the conspiracy or the merger or Oliver Vance at all. Lena noticed it. He could tell she noticed it because her chin came up by a fraction, the micro-movement of someone choosing to hold ground rather than step back. "Get some sleep," she said. "You have a call with your attorney at..." She glanced at the clock. 8 minutes, based on when you told him 10 minutes. He had, in fact, forgotten about Nathan entirely. "Yes," he said. She moved to the door, opened it. The cold November night came in. "Lena," he said. She turned. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "The diner." It was not quite a question. She held his gaze for a beat. 7 o'clock, she said. "The sourdough's best when it's fresh." She left. He stood in the cold air from the open door for a moment after she'd gone, and then picked up his phone and called Nathan, and while Nathan's voice filled the line with legal timelines and liability frameworks and document verification protocols, Rhett looked at the Cedarwood parking lot and thought about a woman who had identified a 14-month strategic play in 40 minutes using nothing but sequencing and logic, and the particular quality of mind that emerges when someone has spent years making something out of very little. He thought about the fact that someone in his circle had given Oliver Vance her name. The controlled surface held, but underneath it, something that was not quite fury, and not quite something else entirely, had taken up a very firm residence. What Rhett did not know yet, what none of them in room 5 had fully assembled, was that the anonymous document package had not been sent by an ally. It had been sent by Oliver Vance himself, not out of carelessness, out of calculation. The documents were real. Vance had made sure of that, because fabricated evidence was a liability, and real evidence, carefully timed, was a tool. He had sent the documents knowing Rhett would spend months trying to verify them, knowing the verification process would consume exactly the attention and the resources that might otherwise have been directed at the board. Paulson had come first, an introduction through a charitable foundation that Rhett's own company sponsored. Clean, natural, The kind of connection that left no fingerprints. Garrett had come through a mutual contact at a conference in Geneva. Reeves through a private equity referral that appeared entirely unrelated to Veritech or anything connected to it. 3 board members, 18 months. A merger that looked like an opportunity. And a CEO who was brilliant, careful, and had spent so long looking at the evidence in his hands that he hadn't looked at the door through which it had arrived. The one variable Vance had not accounted for was a diner in Grayfield, Oregon. The one variable Vance had not accounted for was Lena Vasquez. He was beginning, as of 6:47 p.m. on Wednesday the 4th of November, to account for her. That was the part that mattered. That was the part that changed everything. Chapter 6. She didn't sleep well. This was not unusual for her. She was a light sleeper by nature, the kind of person whose brain treated the transition between waking and sleep as a negotiation, rather than a surrender. But usually the negotiation was with ordinary things. The radiator, Birch's nocturnal reorganization of the apartment, the low-grade financial arithmetic that lived in the back of her mind like background software. Tonight the negotiation was with something else entirely. She lay in the dark with Birch, a warm, indifferent weight against her legs, and thought about a man who had built a $2 billion company on a foundation his father had laid, and had spent 14 months trying to protect people he'd never met in a country he'd never visited, and had done it quietly, without press, without positioning it as a virtue, had done it, as far as she could tell, simply because it was the right thing, and he was the person who could. She thought about the fact that someone had tried to weaponize that decency against him. She thought about Oliver Vance saying the Hollow Spoon Diner, is it? In that pleasant, rehearsed voice, and the cold precision of a man who had done his research and was now applying it. She thought about Rhett standing in the open doorway of room 5 with the November cold coming in, saying tomorrow morning, in a tone that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite. She thought about the sourdough. She got up at 5:30, which was 20 minutes earlier than necessary, and made coffee, and sat at the window and watched Clement Street come into its pale gray morning self. At 6:15 she went downstairs and opened the diner. The sourdough went in at 6:20. By 6:50 it was out, and the smell of it filled the Hollow Spoon with the particular warmth that Lena thought of as the diner's best version of itself, the version that existed before customers arrived, when it was just her and the kitchen and the morning. She was arranging the counter when the bell above the door announced him at 7:03. He was wearing different clothes. Daniel had brought a bag from Portland along with the car, apparently. Dark trousers and a gray sweater that was clearly expensive in the specific way his clothes always were, the way that had nothing to do with logos and everything to do with how fabric could be made to behave. His hair was dry, his eyes were clear. He looked, she thought, like a man who had also not slept particularly well, but had made a thorough peace with it. He sat at the counter. Same stool as yesterday. She poured his coffee without asking. He wrapped his hands around the mug. "How's Nathan?" she asked. Cautiously alarmed, he said, which from Nathan is the equivalent of anyone else running in circles. "Did you tell him about the timing? Garrett and the documents?" "Yes." He looked at the coffee. "He's pulling the board appointment records. The full paper trail on how each candidate was recommended. It will take a few days." "And Daniel?" "Daniel spent the night making calls. I'm not going to ask him to detail for me yet." He paused. "He found something, I think. He went quiet in a particular way around 2 a.m., and hasn't said much since." Lena filed this. Quiet in a particular way, from a security professional at 2 a.m., was a significant data point. "Eggs?" she said. "Please." He almost smiled, scrambled. She went to the kitchen and put the eggs on, and when she came back out he was looking at the diner with the same expression he'd had yesterday morning, that unhurried, absorbing attention he gave to things that interested him. "Can I ask you something?" she said, setting the plate down. "You can ask. Why did you stay?" He looked at her. "The 24 hours. Yes. You said you needed them, but you had the information about Vance by last night. You had Nathan on the phone. Daniel had his laptop open. You could have done all of that from Portland." She held his gaze. "Why Grayfield?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because in Portland I would have been managing it," he said. "The board, the press, Camille, the appearance of being in control. Here I can think about it. He paused. There's a difference. Managing versus thinking, she said. Yes. And the thinking is more useful right now. The thinking is what I've been missing for 14 months, he said, with a directness that told her it cost something to say. I've been so deep in the operational response, verify the documents, protect the legal position, hold the board, that I stopped thinking about the actual shape of it. He looked at her. You saw the shape in 40 minutes. I had distance, she said. I didn't have 14 months of investment in a particular version of the story. That's generous. It's accurate, she said. Fresh eyes aren't smarter. They're just unencumbered. He ate his eggs. She refilled his coffee. The morning built around them the same way it had yesterday, and she was aware, with the part of her that observed things against her will, that it felt, already, like a pattern, like something that had been happening long enough to have a rhythm, which was an absurd thing to feel about a man she'd known for 32 hours. Tommy arrived at 7:30 to start his prep shift, looked at the man at the counter, looked at Lena, and had the wisdom of youth not to say anything. At 8:15, Daniel appeared. He came through the door looking like a man who had slept 3 hours and found them sufficient, which Lena was beginning to understand was Daniel's default state. He sat 2 stools down from Rhett, accepted the coffee Lena poured without being asked. She was becoming fluent in the Callaway party's coffee needs, and opened his laptop on the counter. Tell me, Rhett said. Daniel glanced at Lena. Rhett said, without looking up from his mug, tell me. Daniel looked at Lena again, differently this time. Not exclusionary, she realized. Assessing. The way he'd looked at her in room 5, that security professional calibration. The 3 board members, Daniel said. I traced the recommendation chains. Paulson came through the Hargrove Foundation, a charitable organization your company has sponsored for 4 years. The foundation's executive director is a man named Silas Brent. He paused. Silas Brent's previous position was VP of External Relations at a holding company called Meridian Group. Rhett was very still. Meridian Group, he said, is the parent company of 4 Veritech subsidiaries, Daniel said, including the Singapore operation. The counter was quiet. Lena set down the carafe she'd been holding. So Paulson came through a foundation run by a former Veritech-affiliated executive, Rhett said. Yes. And Garrett, the Geneva conference introduction. The mutual contact was a man named Frederick Holst, investment banker, Zurich-based, clean record. But Holst's firm has done 3 rounds of private financing for Veritech in the last 6 years. And Reeves, Rhett said. The private equity referral, Daniel said. The firm is called Aldercrest Capital. They have no direct Veritech connection that I can find. But Aldercrest's managing partner sat on the board of Meridian Group until 2017. The shape of it was fully visible now. Lena could see it the way you saw a pattern in fabric once you'd found the repeat. Suddenly obvious, suddenly everywhere. It's not 3 separate infiltrations, she said. It's one network. Meridian Group is the connective tissue. Vance built his board access through Meridian relationships, some direct, some one step removed, so that no single appointment looks connected to Veritech. Because if you trace any one of them, Rhett said, you hit a dead end before you reach Vance. You'd have to trace all 3 simultaneously to see the pattern, Daniel said, which requires knowing to look for a pattern in the first place. The 3 of them sat with it for a moment. Tommy, at the far end of the counter, was very deliberately restocking napkin holders and giving every impression of being entirely absorbed in this task. The documents, Rhett said. If Vance sent them himself, if that's what the timing suggests, then he wanted me looking at Veritech's labor record while the board appointments happened around me. Misdirection, Lena said. He gave you a real problem to focus on, so you wouldn't notice the mechanism being assembled. Which means he was confident the merger would eventually pass regardless of my opposition, Rhett said. He only needed the board in place. My opposition was, the muscle in his jaw moved. Scenery. Daniel closed his laptop. There's more. Rhett looked at him. The journalist who called your personal phone yesterday morning, Daniel said. Financial Times. Her name is Grace Okafor. She's been covering Veritech for 7 months, specifically the Singapore investigation. He paused. She didn't call for a quote about your disappearance. Then why did she call? Rhett said. Because she has a source inside Veritech, Daniel said. And her source told her, 4 days ago, that someone was planning to use your absence from public life, however long it lasted, for whatever reason it occurred, to fast-track the merger completion. Skip the standard 60-day integration review. Push through the final signatures while you're off the board's radar. The silence that followed was the kind that had mass. Lena looked at Rhett. His expression had not changed. The controlled surface was holding, but something behind his eyes had gone very focused and very cold, in a way that she understood, now, was not anger. It was the specific clarity of a person who had just seen the full board and knew exactly which move to make. They needed me gone, he said. Not permanently, Daniel said. Just long enough. The merger completion can be executed by board majority, without your signature if the legal term is unavailable for executive function. Which a voluntary disappearance from public life could be framed as, Lena said. Yes, Daniel said. So getting out of that car, Rhett said slowly. May have been used, Daniel said. Yes. The morning sun had strengthened while they'd been talking, and it came through the hollow spoon's front window now in long, pale bars across the counter, and Lena thought about a man walking 4 miles in the rain, because he needed one night where no one looked at him like a symbol, and the grotesque efficiency of a conspiracy that could turn even that into a lever. Call Grace Okafor back, Lena said. Both men looked at her. She called because she has information, and she needs a source that can corroborate it, Lena said. You have information, and you need someone who can publish it before the merger completion is fast-tracked. That's not an interview, that's an exchange. She looked at Rhett. She's been working this story for 7 months. She's not going to burn you. Rhett held her gaze for a long moment. You're suggesting I go to the press before I go back to the board, he said. I'm suggesting that right now the board thinks you're gone, and Vance thinks I know nothing, she said. That's a window. It won't stay open. Daniel looked at Rhett with the expression of a man who professionally disagreed with the strategic risk and personally thought she was right. Rhett looked at his coffee mug, then at Clement Street, then at Lena. Do you have a computer I can use? He said. Mine is being monitored. Lena untied her apron and walked to the back office, Ray's office, which contained a desktop computer from 2016, a router, and a collection of woodworking magazines, and came back with the laptop she kept there for the inspection paperwork and freelance invoicing. She set it on the counter in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. The almost smile arrived and stayed this time, not at the corner of his mouth but fully present, brief and real, and nothing like the composed public face on the CNBC chyron. Thank you, he said. Stop thanking me, she said. Find Grace Okafor. He opened the laptop. Outside on Clement Street, a delivery truck was making its morning rounds, and 2 women were walking a dog past the diner window, and Grayfield was doing what it always did, existing quietly at the edge of everything, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know where to look. Lena went back to her counter and refilled Tommy's coffee and thought about windows and how quickly they closed. Chapter 7. Grace Okafor answered on the second ring. Her voice was alert in the way of someone who had been waiting for a call. Not the grogginess of an interrupted morning, but the clipped, focused readiness of a person who had kept their phone close. This is Grace, she said. This is Rhett Calloway, he said. You called me yesterday morning. A beat, short and controlled. The beat of someone absorbing significant information and not letting it show in their breathing. Mr. Calloway, she said. Yes. Thank you for calling back. I understand you've been covering Veritech Solutions for 7 months, he said. Another beat, longer. He could hear her recalibrating. She'd called expecting to leave another voicemail, and instead had the subject of her investigation on a line, speaking directly, which was either an extraordinary development or a trap, and she was deciding which. That's correct, she said, carefully. I'm not calling to give you a quote about my whereabouts, he said. I'm calling because I believe we have overlapping information about Veritech and Oliver Vance, and I think the timeline for both of us is compressing. The silence this time was the silence of a journalist doing the fastest risk calculation of her morning. Where are you? She said. Somewhere I'd prefer to keep off the record for the moment. Are you safe? The question surprised him slightly. Not its content, but its priority. She'd led with his safety before the story. He filed that. Yes, he said. Are you in a position to talk securely? Give me 4 minutes, she said. I'll call you back on a different line. He gave her the number of Daniel's secondary phone, which Daniel held out without being asked, having apparently tracked the entire conversation from 2 stools away, with the focused stillness of a man whose professional life was built on exactly this kind of monitoring. The 4 minutes passed. Lena restocked the pastry case. Tommy ran food to the 2 tables that had filled up during the morning. The diner did what diners did, moved and clattered, and smelled like coffee and warm bread. And Rhett sat at the counter of the Hollow Spoon, with Daniel's phone in his hand, and thought about his father, briefly, in the specific way he sometimes did when a situation had reached the point where action was the only remaining language. His father had said, once, near the end, the thing about doing the right thing is that it's rarely the easy thing, and almost never the fast thing, but it's the only thing that holds. The phone rang. Okay, Grace Okafor said. I'm secure. Talk to me. He talked for 22 minutes. He told her about the document package, its contents, its timing, its anonymous origin. He told her about the board appointments and the Meridian Group connections Daniel had traced through the night. He told her about the merger vote, and the fast-track completion plan, and the legal mechanism by which his absence could be used to bypass his oversight. He did not tell her where he was. He did not tell her about Lena. Those were the 2 things he kept. Grace listened with the same quality of attention Lena had, complete, absorbing, no performance, but with the additional layer of a person who was simultaneously cross-referencing what she was hearing against what she already knew, and he could tell when they connected because her breathing changed slightly, a quickening that she controlled but couldn't entirely suppress. The Meridian Group connection, she said when he'd finished. I have part of that. I have Paulson's foundation link. I couldn't confirm it was intentional. I thought it might be coincidence. But I have something you don't. Tell me, he said. The Singapore workers, she said. The 3 who filed the complaint that disappeared. I've been in contact with one of them for 4 months. Her name is Priya Shen. She's been living under a relocation agreement, a payment in exchange for silence. But the agreement has a clause that voids it if Veritech is acquired by a company of sufficient size and resources to pursue independent legal action on her behalf. Rhett was very still. If Callaway Global completes the merger, he said. She can void the agreement, Grace said. She has copies of the original complaint documents, the safety records before they were altered, and this is what I've been waiting to confirm. A recording of the conversation in which a Veritech executive told her the investigation had been resolved, and she should consider the matter closed. A recording, Rhett said. Amateur quality, made on her phone, but audible, and the executive on the recording is identifiable. Who? A pause. Oliver Vance, Grace said. In person, which means he wasn't operating through intermediaries on this one. He was there. The counter was very quiet. Daniel had gone entirely still. Lena, at the far end, had stopped moving. Rhett looked at the Hollow Spoon's front window, at Clement Street in its pale November morning, at a town that had no idea it was currently the location of a conversation that was about to restructure something significant. What do you need from me? He said. Corroboration of the board infiltration timeline, Grace said. On record. Your name attached. And I need it before the merger completion is fast-tracked. My source inside Veritech says they're targeting Friday. Today was Thursday. You have 24 hours, he said. I can work with 24 hours, she said. Can you get me the documentation? The Meridian connection? The appointment records? He looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded once. I can get it. Yes, Rhett said. I'll have it to you by this afternoon. Mr. Callaway. Grace paused. When this runs, and it will run, I'm not sitting on this. Your board is going to know you were the source. Your relationship with them, my relationship with my board, he said, is a problem I'll address when the more important problem is resolved. Another pause. All right. Her voice had shifted, still professional, but warmer at the edges. One more thing. Off the record. Off the record, he agreed. "Whoever told you to call me," she said, "had good instincts. Don't lose track of them." He looked at Lena, who was pouring coffee with her back to him, and who had clearly heard every word from the counter of her own diner. "I don't intend to," he said. She heard the call end. She heard Daniel immediately begin typing with the focused velocity of a man working against a clock. She heard Rhett set the phone down on the counter and exhale once. Quiet, controlled, the exhale of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is now on the other side of it. She kept her back to him for a moment longer than necessary, doing something with the coffee filters that did not require her full attention, giving herself the 3 seconds she needed to put the expression away, the one that had been building since "I don't intend to," which had been said in a tone that had nothing to do with Grace Okafor, and she knew it, and he knew it, and they were both, for the moment, declining to address it. She turned around. "Friday," she said. "Yes. That's tomorrow." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Is 24 hours enough?" "It has to be," he said. It wasn't bravado, just the flat arithmetic of a situation with a fixed deadline, and the only available response being forward. She thought about the diner, suddenly, with a clarity that surprised her, about Ray and Tommy and Helen across the street, and the sourdough at 6:20 every morning, and the health inspection paperwork she'd finally filed, and the particular quality of a life that was small in scale and real in substance. She thought about Oliver Vance saying the Hollow Spoon Diner, is it? And the cold efficiency of a man who had located and catalogued her in 12 hours. She thought about windows. "What do you need?" she said. Rhett looked at her with an expression that had come undone slightly from the controlled surface, not dramatically, not in any way that Tommy or a passing customer would have registered, but she was not Tommy or a passing customer, and she saw it. "You've already done," he started. "What do you need?" she said again, not unkindly, just firmly. In the tone she used for it was just breakfast and scrambled, is not an answer. He held her gaze. "Daniel is going to compile the documentation for Grace. That takes him out of the room for most of the day." He paused. "I need to draft a formal statement for my attorney, the kind that documents my account of the board infiltration timeline in legal language, for the record, before anything goes public, in case the board challenges it." "You need to write something," she said. "I need to write something I haven't been able to write for 14 months, he said, "because every previous attempt has been inside the machine I was trying to describe. I need," he stopped. The controlled surface did something complicated. "I need someone to read it as a person, not a lawyer. Someone who will tell me if it's accurate to what actually happened, rather than to what I can prove." Lena was quiet for a moment. "Give me 20 minutes to sort the lunch prep with Tommy," she said. "Then we'll use Ray's office." Ray's office was small, and smelled like pine and old paper, and the ghost of someone's terrible instant coffee. There was a desk, the 2016 computer, the woodworking magazines, a window that looked onto the alley beside the diner, and 2 chairs. They sat across from each other, with Lena's laptop between them. Rhett wrote. He wrote with the focused, uninterrupted velocity of someone who had been holding a thing at a distance for a long time and had finally gotten close enough to put it down. Lena read as he went. Not editing, just absorbing, occasionally asking a clarifying question in the quiet voice she used when she needed precision and not elaboration. "When you say the board vote was unanimous, was there any recorded dissent before the vote? Any email or communication? The 3 meetings where you presented the Veritech concerns, were those minutes formally recorded or informal? The anonymous document package, you said you received it. Physically? Digitally?" He answered each question. She nodded, and he kept writing. It was, she thought, the strangest and most specific kind of collaboration. 2 people building a true account of something neither of them had fully witnessed, one from the inside and one from the outside, triangulating toward accuracy. At 11:47 he stopped. He leaned back in the desk chair and read what he'd written from the top, and she watched his face as he read, the slight movement of his eyes, the stillness of the rest of him. "It's accurate," he said, not to her, just to himself, or to the document, like confirming a measurement. "Yes," she said, "it is." He looked at her. They were closer in Ray's small office than they'd been in any of the other rooms. and the quality of the air was doing the thing it had been doing since the booth yesterday morning, compressing, in the way that had nothing to do with the conspiracy, and everything to do with two people who had spent 36 hours in each other's proximity, during the kind of high-stakes, high-honesty situation that stripped the ordinary social distance away. "Lena," he said. "Don't," she said, gently. "Not as a rejection, as a preservation. Not right now, there's still a Friday." He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Recognition, she thought. The recognition of someone who understood the difference between the right thing and the right time for it. "After Friday," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him for a beat. "Send the document to Nathan," she said. He almost smiled. He turned back to the laptop. She stood up and went back to the counter, and the diner was warm and the November light was doing its pale best through the front window, and Lena poured herself a coffee she hadn't had time for all morning, and stood at the counter and thought about after Friday in the careful, guarded way she thought about things she wanted and was afraid to want. At 2 p.m., Daniel came in from the cold with his laptop bag and a look on his face that Lena had not seen before. It was not alarm. It was the controlled expression of a person managing something they had not anticipated. He sat at the counter. Lena poured his coffee. "Where's Rhett?" he said, quietly. "Ray's office, still on with Nathan." Daniel nodded. He looked at his coffee, then at Lena, with the full, direct assessment he'd been moderating until now. "Someone photographed the diner this morning," he said. "From the street. The image is on a private social media account. Not public limited audience. But the account has a connection to a communications firm that does work for Veritech." Lena set down the carafe. "How long ago?" she said. "Timestamp is 8:47 a.m., Daniel said, while Rhett was on the call with Grace. 8:47, the morning sun through the window, Rhett visible at the counter, his face in profile. "Could they identify him from the image?" she said. "Possibly," Daniel said. "The angle was from the street, through the glass. It's not clean, but if someone is specifically looking for him..." "They already know he's here," Lena said. "They may know," Daniel said. "There's a difference between suspicion and confirmation. Right now, we're still inside the window." "The window. 24 hours, compressing. Then we use what's left of it," Lena said. Daniel looked at her with the expression he'd had in room 5, the security professional assessing a variable, and this time the assessment settled into something that looked, around the edges, like respect. "I'll tell him," he said. "Tell him after he finishes with Nathan," she said. "He needs the document locked first." Daniel looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up his coffee and nodded once, with the brevity of a man who communicated volumes in small movements. Outside, Clement Street went on in its ordinary way. Inside, the window held. For now. Chapter 8. The photograph changed something. Not in the way a dramatic revelation changes things. No one came through the door. No confrontation materialized on Clement Street. The diner went on being the diner. Tommy ran the lunch tables. The pastry case needed restocking at one point, and Lena restocked it. Ray called at 2:30 to ask about the inspection paperwork, and she told him it was filed, and he said she was a saint, and she said she was an employee, and they had the same conversation they always had. But underneath all of it, the photograph sat in her awareness like a stone in a shoe. Small, specific, impossible to ignore once you knew it was there. Someone had stood on Clement Street at 8:47 in the morning and pointed a camera through her window. Through her window, at her diner, at a life she had built from the particular materials available to her in a town that the rest of the world had largely decided didn't matter. She found she minded this more than she had expected to. Not the danger of it, she was pragmatic enough to hold that at arm's length for now. What she minded was the intrusion of it, the presumption, the idea that Oliver Vance, from whatever glass and steel office he occupied in whatever city, had extended a hand into Grayfield and touched something of hers without asking. She was still thinking about this at 3:15, when Rhett came out of Ray's office. He looked at her face and read it immediately. She was beginning to expect this, the speed with which he processed her expressions, the way his attention moved to the specific thing she was managing, rather than the surface she was presenting. "Daniel told you about the photograph," he said. Daniel told me, she confirmed. He sat at the counter. The lunch rush had cleared and the diner was quiet. Just one elderly couple at the window table, sharing a slice of pie with the comfortable silence of people who had been sharing things for a very long time. I need to ask you something, Rhett said, and I need you to answer it honestly rather than practically. She looked at him. Those are usually the same thing for me. Not always, he said. Sometimes practical is a way of not saying the honest thing. She held his gaze. He was right, and she knew he was right, and the fact that he was right after 38 hours of knowing her was something she was going to address privately later. Ask, she said. Are you afraid? She considered it genuinely, not the reflexive no of someone who'd decided in advance to be fine, but the actual question, held at arm's length and examined. Not of Vance, she said. Not directly. He's a businessman with a leverage problem, he's not going to send someone to Greyfield. No, Rhett agreed. That's not his method. But I'm aware, she said carefully, that if this goes the way you need it to go, the article, the legal documentation, the board, my name may surface, not publicly, but in Vance's investigation of what happened and where it unraveled. She paused. And that could have consequences for the diner, for Ray, for people in this town who have nothing to do with any of this. Rhett was quiet. That's the honest answer, she said. Yes, he said, it is. He looked at the counter for a moment. I want to tell you that you're protected, that I can guarantee nothing reaches you or this place. He looked back up. But I think you'd rather I didn't say things I can't fully guarantee. I would, she said. So I'll say this instead, he said. I will do everything in my power to make sure that when this resolves, Greyfield is the last place anyone is looking. And the first thing I will do when I'm back in New York is establish a legal buffer between this town and anything connected to my name. He paused. Not because I owe you a transaction, because this town gave me something when I needed it, and I don't repay that by making it a liability. Lena looked at him for a long moment. That's a very careful thing to say, she said. I'm a careful person. You got out of a moving car in the rain, with no coat or phone, she said. The almost smile arrived. I'm a careful person who occasionally makes structural exceptions. She almost laughed. It surprised her, not the laugh itself, but how close it was to the surface, how easily this man got there. She turned back to the coffee station, because she needed something to do with her hands, and because the elderly couple at the window had finished their pie and would want the check. At 4 p.m., Daniel called Grace Okafor's secure line and transferred the Meridian Group documentation, appointment records, foundation connections, financing histories, all of it compiled through the night and the morning into a package that Grace received and, according to her text confirmation, spent 40 minutes reading before sending back 3 follow-up questions that Daniel answered within the hour. At 5 p.m., Nathan called Rhett on Daniel's secondary phone with a confirmation that the legal statement was properly structured and filed internally, a time-stamped record of Rhett's account that established a legal paper trail predating any public disclosure. At 5:30, Grace sent a message that said, "Story is written. Legal review tonight. Runs tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Eastern. Are you certain?" Rhett typed back, "Certain." Lena read the exchange over his shoulder. Not intrusively, he'd turned the screen toward her, and felt the weight of tomorrow morning settle into the room. Friday. The window was closing exactly on schedule. He stayed at the diner until 6, when Lena's shift ended, and Tommy locked up the kitchen for the evening prep handoff. He did not have a reason to stay past 5 that was strictly operational. The documentation was sent, the statement was filed. The call with Grace was complete. Daniel had the evening's logistics managed, a secure line for any overnight developments, a car confirmed for a 6 a.m. departure that would get Rhett to Portland before the article ran, and to New York by afternoon. He stayed because the diner was warm, and Clement Street was turning amber in the early dark of November, and Lena was moving through the closing routine, with the fluid, practiced efficiency he had been watching for 2 days now, and had not tired of. He stayed because tomorrow morning everything would be different. Not bad, necessarily. He was not afraid of the board's reaction, or the press cycle that would follow Grace's article, or the legal complexity of the next several weeks. He had been in difficult professional situations before, and he had the tools for this one. He stayed because Grayfield, Oregon, Pop, 4,200, was going to go back to being a town he'd driven through once in a personal crisis, and Lena Vasquez was going to go back to being the woman who had fed him when he was cold, and found the shape of his problem in 40 minutes, and told him after Friday with a carefulness that had lived in his chest since she'd said it. And he was aware, with the precision he brought to things that mattered, that after Friday required him to be a person who actually came back. He was not someone who made commitments lightly. He was also not someone who said things he didn't mean. He had said, "I don't intend to." He had meant it in the full sense of the word. Lena came out of the kitchen with her coat and her bag, and found him still at the counter, and looked at him with the expression that was trying to be neutral and was not quite. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here." She sat down on the stool beside him, not across, beside, which was new, and which he understood was a decision rather than a convenience. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" she asked. "Ready," he said. Then, because she had asked him once about honest versus practical, and aware that ready and prepared are not the same as certain, she nodded. "The board is going to be angry." "Yes." "Vance is going to deny everything initially." "Yes." "The press cycle is going to be a lot." "Yes." He looked at her. "None of that is the part I'm thinking about." She was quiet for a moment. "Rhett," she started. "I know," he said. "Not yet. There's still a tonight." She looked at him. Her chin came up by the fraction he'd learned, the micro-movement of someone choosing to hold ground. "Tonight," she said, "I was going to offer you dinner, at my apartment, because you've had diner food for 2 days, and I actually cook, and it seemed like the right thing." She paused. "That's the whole offer, dinner, nothing attached to it." He held her gaze. "I'd like that," he said. Her apartment was exactly what he'd expected and nothing like it. He'd expected, based on the practical efficiency, the freelance invoicing, the radiator clicks she'd mentioned, something spare, functional, the apartment of someone who had organized their life around what was necessary. It was spare, yes, but it was also full, in a way that had nothing to do with objects. The walls had her work on them, small framed prints, graphic and precise, with a color sense that was both restrained and specific. The bookshelf was organized in a system that was clearly personal rather than alphabetical. The cat, Birch, gray and deliberate, assessed him from the radiator with the evaluation of someone accustomed to being the room's primary critic and finding most subjects wanting. Lena made pasta, simple, from scratch, with the efficient confidence of someone who cooked the way she did everything else, without performance, but with complete attention. He sat at her small kitchen table and watched her cook and talked, which was the other unexpected thing, because he did not, typically, talk. Not like this. Not in the unhurried, unstructured way that had nothing to do with agenda. He told her about his father, not the professional legacy, the man, the way he'd insisted on eating dinner at a table even when the company was in crisis, the specific laugh he had for things that were absurd rather than funny, the way he'd said the only thing that holds like it was structural engineering rather than ethics. Lena told him about the scholarship, Portland, the semester that became 2 and then expired. She told it without bitterness and without softening it, just the sequence of it, the way one true thing had led to another and deposited her here, which was not where she'd planned to be, and was also not nothing. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Staying." She put a bowl of pasta in front of him and sat across the table with her own, and considered the question with the genuine attention she gave everything. "I regret the scholarship," she said. "Not Grayfield. There's a difference." She picked up her fork. "This town needed someone to stay. I happened to be the person who stayed. That's not tragedy, it's just what happened. You could still go," he said. "I know," she said. "The option didn't expire. I just haven't yet." She looked at him briefly. "Some things take the right moment." He looked at her across the small kitchen table with the pasta between them, and the radiator clicking its Morse code, and Birch having relocated from the radiator to the back of Lena's chair, where he sat with the proprietary air of a creature who had opinions about dinner guests. "Some things do," he said. They ate. The conversation moved the way conversations move, when two people are both, quietly, aware that the night has a shape, and they are inside it together. Not rushing toward any particular point, but not pretending the point doesn't exist either. After dinner she made tea, and they moved to the small couch because the kitchen chairs were not designed for extended sitting, and Birch transferred his assessment operations to the arm of the couch nearest Rhett, which Lena watched with an expression that suggested this was either a good sign or an omen, and she wasn't certain which. "He doesn't usually do that," she said. "Should I be concerned?" "He knocked a full glass of water onto my laptop once," she said, deliberately, without apparent remorse. "So, use your judgment." Rhett looked at Birch. Birch looked back with the absolute self-possession of a creature who had never questioned its own authority. "I like him," Rhett said. "Of course you do," Lena said. "He's the only other person in this room who doesn't explain himself." He looked at her. She was looking at her tea, but the corner of her mouth had done the thing his almost smile did, arrived and stayed. "Lena," he said. She looked up. He had been careful all evening. He had held the line at tonight the way she'd held it at after Friday, because she had set the boundary, and he respected it, and she was right that the night had its own shape, and rushing it was a way of not trusting the shape. But they were at the end of the night now, and the shape was complete, and there was something he needed to say before tomorrow morning changed the specific gravity of everything. "When I came back to New York," he said, "I would like to come back to Grayfield first." She held his gaze. "That's a long drive from New York," she said. "I'm aware of the geography." "Rhett," she said his name, in the tone that meant, "I'm being careful because this matters, and I don't want to be careless with it. You're going to walk back into a board crisis, and a press cycle, and a legal situation that's going to consume." "I know what I'm walking back into," he said. "I also know what I'm walking away from." He paused. "Those are different calculations." She was quiet. Outside, Grayfield was doing its late-night quiet, the kind that had no traffic in it, just the occasional sound of wind and the distant click of the hardware store sign on its bracket. "Ask me again," she said finally, "when it's after Friday and you're on the other side of it, and you've had a week to remember what your actual life looks like." She looked at him steadily. "If you ask me then, my answer will be different than it is right now." He understood that. He understood that completely. And the fact that she'd said it the way she had, not no, not maybe, but ask me then, was the most honest and the most generous thing she could have offered. "Then I'll ask you then," he said. She nodded once. The decision made, the line held, both of them on the right side of it. He stood, put on his coat. Birch watched from the arm of the couch with the expression of a creature filing information for later use. At the door, Lena said, 6 a.m. "I know. The article runs at 6 a.m. Eastern. That's 3 a.m. here. I'll be awake," he said. "I know you will," she said. "So will I." He looked at her in the doorway of her apartment above the hardware store on Clement Street, with the Morse code radiator behind her, and the small framed prints on her walls, and the cat who had apparently decided to reserve judgment. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." She pointed at him. "The mug," she said. He almost laughed. It came out instead as something that was entirely a smile, full and unguarded, the first one of those he'd produced in longer than he could specifically remember. "The mug," he agreed. He walked down the stairs and out into the Grayfield night, and the cold air was clean, and the stars were out for the first time since he'd arrived, and somewhere in New York a journalist was finishing her legal review of a story that was going to detonate in approximately 9 hours. He walked back to the cedarwood with his hands in his coat pockets, and thought about Ask Me Then, and felt, for the first time in 14 months, that the weight he'd been carrying had found somewhere specific to set itself down. Chapter 9. She didn't sleep at all. This was different from not sleeping well. Not sleeping well was a negotiation, a back and forth between wakefulness and rest that eventually resolved in favor of something. Not sleeping at all was a decision the body made without consulting the brain, a flat refusal to disengage from the present moment. And Lena's body had made it definitively at approximately 11 p.m. and had not revisited the question since. She lay in the dark and listened to Birch rearranging himself periodically, and the radiator clicking its endless message, and the wind off the coast moving through Greyfield's quiet streets, and she thought about a smile. Not the almost smile. The real one. The one that had arrived full and unguarded at the door. The one that had changed the geometry of his face into something she hadn't been prepared for after 2 days of controlled surfaces and careful reveals. The one that had made her stand in her own doorway after he'd gone down the stairs and look at nothing in particular for longer than was strictly reasonable. She thought about Ask Me Then. She had meant it as a protection, for both of them. She was practical enough to understand that the specific intensity of the last 48 hours had its own chemistry, the kind that high-stakes proximity always generated, and that did not always survive contact with ordinary life. She had been through enough to know that the person you were in a crisis was not necessarily the person you were on a Tuesday with nothing at stake, and she was not going to make a decision in a burning building that she'd have to live with once the fire was out. But she was also honest enough, in the dark, to acknowledge that Ask Me Then was not the same as the answer is no. The answer was not no. The answer was something she was keeping carefully in her hands, like something fragile and real, waiting for the moment when she could set it down somewhere stable. At 2:45 a.m. she gave up on sleep entirely, and got up and made coffee, and opened her laptop, and sat at the kitchen table with Birch on the chair beside her. He had migrated from the radiator at some point in the night, which was unusual, and waited. At 3 a.m. Eastern, her phone screen lit up. A text from an unknown number she immediately recognized as Daniel's secondary line. It's up. She opened the Financial Times on her laptop with hands that were steadier than she expected. The headline read, Veritech Solutions Shadow Board. How Oliver Vance Engineered a $4 billion Merger from the Inside. By Grace Okafor, Financial Times, exclusive. Documents obtained by the Financial Times, corroborated by Callaway Global CEO Rhett Callaway, reveal a systematic infiltration of Callaway's board of directors by figures connected to Veritech parent company Meridian Group, a multi-year strategy designed to force through a merger that Callaway had repeatedly and publicly opposed. Lena read the entire article. It took her 14 minutes. Grace Okafor wrote with the specific, controlled precision of someone who had been sitting on a story for 7 months and had spent every one of those months making it airtight, every claim sourced, every connection documented, every implication followed to its legal conclusion before being committed to print. The Meridian Group connections were laid out with a clarity that made the pattern visible to anyone. The Singapore labor suppression was documented with Priya Shen's account, her name protected, described only as a former Veritech contract worker, and the existence of the recording referenced without being published, a deliberate legal choice that Grace had clearly made with counsel. And at the center of it, Rhett Callaway, named, on record, his account of the board infiltration timeline presented in his own words, the legal statement time-stamped and referenced. He had put his name on it. She sat with that for a moment. $2 billion, a company his father had built, a board that had just betrayed him, and he had put his name on it anyway, because the workers in Singapore, and the investigation that had been suppressed, and the 3 people who had filed a complaint that had disappeared, were more important than the operational comfort of staying quiet. The only thing that holds, his father had said. She understood now why that sentence lived in him the way it did. Her phone rang at 3:17 a.m. Rhett. She answered immediately. I read it, she said, before he could speak. All of it? His voice was clear. He'd been awake, she could tell, with the particular alertness of someone who'd been awake, and working, rather than awake and waiting. All 14 minutes of it, she said. Grace is extraordinary. Yes, he said. She is. A beat. How are you? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, the honest consideration quiet, not the deflecting quiet. Relieved, he said, which surprised me. I expected to feel exposed, but it mostly feels like something that was very heavy has been set down. Because you've been carrying it in the wrong direction, she said. You were carrying it defensively. Now it's out and it's moving forward, and that's a different weight entirely. He was quiet again. Lena, he said. You have about 3 hours before New York wakes up and your phone becomes unusable, she said. You should use them. I know, he said. I wanted to. I needed to hear your voice first, before all of it. She closed her eyes briefly. Go, she said. Handle it. I'll call you from New York, he said. I know you will, she said. She hung up and sat in the 3 a.m. quiet of her kitchen, with Birch and the coffee going cold, and the Financial Times article open on her laptop, and the particular quality of feeling that had no clean name. Not happiness exactly, not fear exactly, something that lived between anticipation and the very careful management of anticipation. Outside, Grayfield slept. The window had closed exactly on schedule. By 6 a.m. New York time, 3 a.m. Grayfield, his phone had 49 missed calls. By 7 a.m., it had 93. He sat in the back of Daniel's car on the way to Portland Airport and read the incoming communications with the systematic efficiency of someone triaging a situation rather than reacting to it, which was the only productive way to operate in the first hours of a story like this. The board members, Paulson, Garrett, and Reeves, had each sent messages that followed the same arc: initial indignation, rapid recalibration, the specific verbal texture of people who had been caught and were now deciding how to position their caughtness. Paulson's message was the most revealing. 3 lines that started with, "This is a serious misrepresentation," and ended with, "I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss," which was, Rhett had learned over 15 years, the syntax of surrender dressed as negotiation. His attorney Nathan had sent a single message at 6:07 a.m., "Well done. Call me when you land." His sister Camille had sent 11 messages across 2 hours that he read in sequence with the expression of someone watching a very familiar weather pattern move through. Camille was 34, ran the Callaway Foundation's Arts Endowment, and had the particular combination of genuine intelligence and spectacular impulsiveness that had defined her since childhood. She had called the press when Rhett disappeared, not out of malice but out of the absolute conviction that action, any action, was better than waiting, which was a philosophy that had caused approximately 40% of the notable incidents in their shared history. Her messages moved from "Where are you?" to "I saw the FT piece," to "Rhett, this is incredible," to "I cannot believe you did this without telling me," to "Actually, I can believe it," to "Call me immediately," to "Finally, I'm proud of you. Dad would be proud of you. Call me when you can." He texted her, "I'll call from the plane." She texted back immediately, "Who helped you? You didn't do this alone. The article says you had support. Who?" He looked at the message for a moment. He typed, "Someone in Grayfield, Oregon." Camille's response took 45 seconds, which for Camille was geological in its patience. "I need to know everything." He put the phone face down on the seat and looked out the window at the Oregon highway moving past. The trees, the gray sky beginning to lighten at the edges, the particular quality of Pacific Northwest morning that was not like morning anywhere else. He thought about a woman sitting in a kitchen at 3 a.m. with coffee going cold. He thought about "Ask Me Then." He had approximately 1 week of board crisis, press management, legal coordination, and organizational restructuring ahead of him before the situation stabilized enough to allow for something that was not an emergency. 1 week was manageable. He had operated on worse timelines. The diner on Friday morning was different. Not dramatically. No one in Grayfield had read the Financial Times at 6 a.m., and the story would not make its way into the town's general awareness for another few hours at least, and even then it would arrive filtered through the particular small-town telegraph of Helen's daughter and Ray's woodworking network and whoever Tommy followed on social media. But Lena knew, and knowing changed the quality of the ordinary morning. The sourdough at 6:20, the coffee at 6:50, the bell above the door announcing the first customers, in a way that was not uncomfortable but was distinct, like the same room with different light. Ray came in at 9 with sawdust on his jacket and the expression of a man who had received information and was vibrating with the effort of presenting it casually. "There's a story," he said, setting his coffee down, "in the Financial Times this morning." "I know," Lena said. "About a billionaire CEO and a merger conspiracy." "I know, Ray. The CEO is named Rhett Callaway." Ray looked at her. "He was in my diner." "He was in your diner," she confirmed. Ray was quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which was his personal record. "Are you all right?" he said. Lena looked at him, at Ray Dominguez, who had known her for 4 years, who called her a saint and meant it as genuine appreciation, even though she deflected it every time, who had bought a diner because he loved the idea of a place where people came in from the cold and left fed. "I'm good, Ray," she said, and meant it. "The story says he had support," Ray said, carefully. "From someone." "The story doesn't say who," Lena said. "No," Ray agreed. He looked at his coffee. "But I know my diner. And I know you." He looked up. "Are we in any trouble?" "No," she said. "We're not in any trouble." Ray nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee. He looked at Clement Street. "He coming back?" Ray said. Not intrusively, just the question of a man who was asking the question she hadn't asked herself out loud yet. She thought about "ask me" then. She thought about a full, unguarded smile at a doorway. She thought about the careful thing she was holding in her hands, waiting for somewhere stable to set it down. "I don't know," she said. It was the honest answer. Ray nodded. He went to his office. She went to her counter. At 11:47 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from a New York number she didn't have saved. Landed. "Nathan is catastrophically cheerful," which apparently means things are going well. Board emergency session called for Monday. Vance issued a denial at 9 a.m. that lasted until 10 a.m. when the recording was referenced in the FT follow-up piece. Grace moved fast. "He's now unavailable for comment." She read it twice. Then, the mug. "I haven't forgotten." She set the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a moment with the particular expression she'd been wearing since 3 a.m., the one with no clean name. She picked the phone back up and typed, "I told you to forget the mug." His response came in 40 seconds. "I don't forget things I owe." She looked at that for a long moment. Then she typed, "Handle your board." He typed back, "Working on it." Then, after a pause, "1 week." She looked at the 2 words. She looked at Clement Street through the window, the hardware store, the cedarwood sign faintly visible at the end of the block, the pale November sun doing its best on the town that the world had largely decided didn't matter. She typed back, "I'll be here." She put the phone in her apron pocket and went back to work. Tommy came in at noon and found her reorganizing the mugs behind the counter with the focused energy of someone whose hands needed something to do while their brain ran a separate program. "You're doing the mug thing," Tommy said. "I'm tidying," Lena said. Tommy, 17, and occasionally perceptive in the way that young people sometimes were, said nothing further and went to start his prep. Outside, the November afternoon settled over Grayfield in its ordinary way. Quiet, amber, unhurried. The kind of afternoon that looked, from the outside, exactly like every other afternoon this town had ever had. Lena knew better. She had known better since 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, when a man had walked through her door soaking wet and shaking, and said, "I'll pay for the mug," in a voice that had been wrung completely dry. Some things, she thought, arranging the last mug into its place, you know from the beginning. You just don't always know what to do with the knowing. Chapter 10. 1 week passed the way significant weeks do, simultaneously too fast and too slow, with a texture that was different from ordinary time. She knew this because she had lived enough significant weeks to recognize the feeling, the way each day had a weight to it that regular days didn't, the way small things accumulated meaning they wouldn't otherwise have had, the way Tuesday's sourdough smelled different from Monday's even when the recipe was identical. The way Birch seemed to sense something ambient in the apartment, and had taken to sitting on the windowsill watching Clement Street with an attention he didn't usually give the outside world. The Financial Times article did what Grace Okafor had built it to do. Lena followed it the way you follow something that happened partly in your kitchen, with the specific, dislocated attention of someone who knows the backstage of a performance that the audience is seeing fresh. By Friday afternoon, the story had been picked up by every major financial publication. By Saturday morning, it had crossed into general news. By Sunday, the Meridian Group connections had been independently verified by 2 additional outlets who had clearly been working adjacent threads and found their stories unlocked by Grace's piece. Oliver Vance's denial lasted, as Rhett had texted, until 10 a.m. Friday, when the FT published its follow-up piece, referencing the existence of the recording. By Sunday evening he had retained 3 attorneys and issued a statement through them that said nothing in the specific, comprehensive way that statements through attorneys were designed to say nothing. The Singapore story, Priya Shen's account, the suppressed complaint, the safety records, ran in full on Saturday in a separate piece that Grace had clearly been holding back deliberately, releasing it after the board infiltration story had established the structural context. It was, Lena thought, reading it at her kitchen table on Saturday morning, with coffee and birch, and the particular stillness of a weekend, the more important piece. The board infiltration was a corporate conspiracy story. The Singapore workers were people. She was glad Grace had understood the difference. The Callaway Global Board held its emergency session on Monday. Rhett had not told her the outcome directly. Their texts through the week had been brief, the shorthand of 2 people who understood the other was operating at full capacity and didn't need the additional weight of narrating it in real time. But Nathan had issued a public statement Monday afternoon that said Paulson, Garrett, and Reeves had tendered their resignations, that the merger with Veritech Solutions had been formally withdrawn, and that Callaway Global was cooperating fully with regulators in 3 jurisdictions. She read it between the lunch rush and the afternoon lull, standing at the counter with her phone. She texted Rhett, Monday statement, clean. He texted back, 4 hours later, cleaner than expected, call you tonight. He called at 9 p.m. She was at the kitchen table with the freelance invoicing, which had backed up during the week because her focus had been elsewhere. How are you? She asked. Functional, he said, which is a significant improvement on last Tuesday. The board resignations were not entirely voluntary, he said, with a flatness that communicated everything, but they were resignations. The legal distinction matters. And Vance? 3 jurisdictions are now looking at the Singapore situation independently, he said. The recording has been formally submitted. What happens next is not in my hands, which is, a pause, the correct place for it to be. She heard something in his voice that she recognized from the exhale after the Grace Okafor call, the sound of a person who had set something down that they'd been carrying too long. Good, she said. Lena, his voice shifted, not dramatically, just the small adjustment of a person moving from one register to another. I said 1 week. You did, she said. The week is done. It is, she said. A pause that had a shape. I'd like to come back to Greyfield, he said. This weekend, if that works. I recognize that's Saturday, she said. The sourdough is best on Saturday. I make extra. A beat. Saturday, he said. Drive this time, she said. Don't get out of any cars. He laughed. She heard it fully, the same quality as the doorway smile, unguarded and real. I'll drive, he said. She hung up and sat in the kitchen quiet with Birch on the chair beside her and the invoicing unfinished on the table and something warm and carefully held moving through her chest. 1 week, Saturday. She went back to the invoicing. He drove. He left Portland at 7 a.m. Saturday, the 9th of November, in a car he'd rented under his own name because he was done with town cars and drivers and the particular armor of a life managed at arm's length from its own details. The drive was 2 hours on a clear morning, the coast highway opening up to the kind of Pacific Northwest gray-blue sky that had no equivalent anywhere else he'd been, and he drove it with the radio off and the window cracked, and the particular quality of mind that came from doing something simple with his own hands. He had not told anyone where he was going. He had told Daniel. That was non-negotiable, and Daniel had accepted it with the expression of a man who had reached a private conclusion and was keeping it diplomatically to himself. He had told Camille, because Camille would have found out anyway, and preemptive honesty was always cheaper than the alternative. Camille had said, Greyfield, Oregon, the town with 1 diner. He had said, yes. She had said, the person who helped you is there. He had said, yes. She had said, Rhett. He had said, Camille. She had said, don't be an idiot about this, which from Camille, who had watched him manage his personal life with the same controlled efficiency he applied to the company for 15 years, was the most specific and most loving advice she had ever given him. He was not going to be an idiot about this. He pulled onto Clement Street at 9:04 a.m. The hardware store. the cedarwood sign at the end of the block, the hollow spoon with its light on, and the particular warmth visible even from outside, the warmth of a place that was doing what it was built to do on a Saturday morning in November. He parked. He sat in the car for approximately 15 seconds with his hands on the wheel. Then he got out and walked through the door, and the bell above it announced him. She heard the bell. She was in the kitchen checking the sourdough, Saturday batch, second pull, and she heard the bell and she knew, with the specific certainty of a body that had made a decision it hadn't fully communicated to the brain yet, that it was him. She took the sourdough out, set it on the rack, untied her apron. She came out of the kitchen. He was standing just inside the door, not slumped against the frame this time, not soaking wet, not shaking, standing with his coat on and his hands in his pockets, and the gray November light behind him through the glass, looking at her with an expression that had none of the controlled surface in it. None of it. Just him, looking at her, in the Hollow Spoon diner on a Saturday morning, having driven 2 hours with the window cracked. The diner was not empty. There were 4 tables occupied, the usual Saturday morning crowd, Tommy running orders with his earphones in. Nobody was looking at them specifically. She walked to the counter. He walked to the counter. They stood on opposite sides of it the way they had for 2 days, except that everything was different now because the window had closed, and the week had passed, and this was after Friday, and she had said, "Ask me then," meaning it as a preservation, and now the thing being preserved was here, present, requiring her to actually do something with it. He reached into his coat pocket. He set something on the counter between them. She looked at it. It was a mug. Not a Hollow Spoon mug, not the heavy diner ceramic of the 40 identical ones on her shelf. It was a different mug entirely. Simple, well-made, a particular shade of deep blue that was somewhere between gray and green with no name she knew. The color of his eyes in the corner booth at midnight. She stared at it. "That is not a $4 mug," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't. Rhett, you said I broke something of yours," he said. "I told you I don't forget things I owe. I owe you a mug." He paused. "I also owe you considerably more than a mug, which I intend to spend a significant amount of time working out, but the mug seemed like the right place to start." She looked at the mug, then at him. "You drove 2 hours to bring me a mug," she said. "I drove 2 hours," he said, "to ask you a question. The mug was logistically convenient." She held his gaze. "Ask it," she said. He looked at her across the counter of the Hollow Spoon, with the Saturday morning noise around them, and the sourdough cooling in the kitchen, and the bell above the door that had announced him the same way it announced everyone, except that it hadn't, not really, not the first time, and not now. "I'd like to have dinner with you," he said, not in a crisis, not at the end of a day that contained a conspiracy, and a bored resignation, and a deadline, just dinner, with you, on a Saturday, in a town I'd like to come back to, if you'll have me. She looked at him for a long moment. The counter between them, the mug the color of his eyes, the diner doing its Saturday morning work around them, indifferent and warm. She picked up the mug. She turned and put it on the shelf behind the counter, not in the back, not tucked away, but in the front row, where it sat among the 40 identical heavy diner ceramics, like something that had decided to belong there. She turned back. "There's a place on the coast," she said, 40 minutes from here. They do a halibut on Saturdays that's worth the drive." Something moved across his face. The full smile, arriving with the same unguarded certainty as the one at the doorway, the one she'd been keeping carefully in her hands all week. "That sounds exactly right," he said. She untied her apron and hung it on its hook and called to Tommy that she was taking her break early, and Tommy looked up from his orders and looked at the man at the counter and looked at Lena and had the wisdom, again, to say nothing, though his expression said quite a lot. She came around the counter. They walked out of the Hollow Spoon together into the November morning, not into a crisis, not with a deadline, not with a conspiracy threading through everything, just out into the gray-blue Saturday air of Grayfield, Oregon, where the cedarwood sign buzzed faintly at the end of the block, and the hardware store was just opening, and the coast was 40 minutes away. He held the door. She stepped through. Epilogue. 3 months later, A regulatory body in Singapore formally reopened the investigation into Veritech Solutions' labor practices. The case was assigned a senior investigator and given full resource allocation. Oliver Vance resigned as CEO of Veritech Solutions in December, citing personal reasons. He was unavailable for comment. Grace Okafor's reporting on the Callaway Veritech case was nominated for a Business Journalism Award in January. She thanked, in her acceptance remarks, a source she described only as someone in Oregon with very good instincts. The Hollow Spoon Diner passed its health inspection in December with a perfect score. Ray Dominguez called it a miracle. Lena called it paperwork. Rhett Callaway appointed 3 new board members in January. Their recommendation chains were independently audited before confirmation. He drove to Grayfield 11 times between November and February. On the 11th visit, he stayed for a week. Birch eventually decided to tolerate him. It took until the 4th visit, which Rhett considered reasonable and Lena considered generous. The blue mug stayed on the front shelf. Nobody at the Hollow Spoon asked about it. In Grayfield, some things were simply allowed to belong.